Alcohol was helping me to avoid responsibility. I put my identity in that because I felt my personality needed to be a certain way, right? I was never an angry drunk. I was kind of fun guy, right? I would have been fun guy. And I remember the doctors and some of my counselors when I was going through counseling with that, they kind of labeled me as a functional alcoholic, which in turn I thought that was a bit of an oxymoron because I was not functioning well, right? But yeah, you hear this term functioning alcoholic. So as a coach, I never missed a practice, never missed a tournament, always on time, got everything going, had tons of energy, did all the things. No one ever questioned my work ethic, but yet I'm drinking 20 to 25 beers a day.
We live in a culture that tells men to be strong, to be composed, resilient, and be dependable, but the one who holds it all together. But what happens when the man is holding everything together begins to quietly fall apart? Welcome, everybody, to today's podcast of trauma, training, and transformation, the podcast where we explore movement heals the mind. And today's conversation is about silent collapse. My guest today is Corey Robinson, former Canadian national team wrestler, coach, mentor, and someone who's walked through identity loss, addiction, faith, and rebuilding. This isn't just a conversation about wrestling. It's about masculinity, pressure, identity, and it's about redefining strength. Corey, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the show. And for the benefit of the listeners, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, James. I really appreciate you having me on and thinking about me in this journey that you're undertaking here. It's been an excellent time watching you succeed in this space. So thank you for the invite. Appreciate it. As mentioned, James, speaking about identity, I linked my identity as an Olympic wrestler for a long, long time. So it kind of started for me when I was about 11 years old. I got into amateur sports and found one of the oldest sports in the world, the sport of Olympic wrestling, when I was about 11 years old. In that journey, that brought me into working with at-risk youth in residential treatment centers out in Alberta, from where I'm from. I continued my journey in wrestling as this organization called Alberta Bosco Homes supported me in my journey, and I acted as a bit of a mentor in there, even as a young man, 19, 20 years old when I started there, and was able to kind of journey with at-risk youth, at the same time develop my skills as an amateur athlete of the sport of Olympic wrestling. And that led into many hats over the years where I've been able to work because of the vessel of sport, led me into some leadership, working with youth from across the country when it came to having young people find a healthy pathway towards healthy goal setting, working with alongside Olympic athletes in public speaking training, in which for them to get into schools to work with young people from the ages of elementary school all the way up into the university age, getting into rooms and youth from across our country to help inspire them to set their goals boldly and smartly. And eventually in my, semi-retirement after coaching, after my venture of an Olympic wrestler, I retired, went into coaching and coached up until about 2012 with our national programs, both men and women. And then after that, I found this interesting sport called CrossFit and eventually became a business owner here in the city of Halifax, where I reside now. And that's been an awesome venture. I've been in there since about 2012, became an owner in about 2019, and continue to develop programs and give my gifts away in a different way through health and physical activity and moving my body and keeping my mind fresh and ready. There you go. All along, trying to balance throughout that process an addiction to alcohol, which tend to keep me in the fog a lot of the times in my life. But I'm through it now, and I look forward to talking about it as we go here today.
Corey, thank you very much for sharing that. And it's an incredible journey you've been on yourself. I'm very lucky I get to share the space of the CrossFit environment where your enthusiasm, your personality is infectious, always willing to help each other, but you're always there to give people that guiding influence and advice when needed with your own unique charm and charisma. But you mentioned there about Olympic wrestling. So before the national team, before the elite wrestling came about, what did young Corey need that wrestling didn't give him?
Interesting. At the time, I think in reflection, I tended to kind of sit with that for a little bit, and it got me to what I wanted, but I really didn't know what I needed, right? So as a young man, I was small in stature as a young person. So I felt like a lot of times the sports that I was getting into, I was I had a lot of vigor and a lot of zeal to want to do a lot of activities. I was involved in tons of sports as a young man, and growing up in the early 80s, in my formative years, there wasn't an abundance of sport teams that you would see today. right? So you'd find a lot of play outside, and you'd come up with creative ways in which to play. And then a lot of our structured play was somewhat unstructured at recess, where you'd find your way in there and work in teams, playing rugby and playing soccer, and even play wrestling. And at the age of 11, I joke sometimes that I'm about your average. I used to do a lot of presentations in schools like elementary grade 6 to grade 8, and they would think this Olympic wrestler, this big wrestler, they hear the name wrestler and they think this 300-pound man's going to come walking into the gym, and I tell them, I hate to disappoint you, I'm about the average size of your average grade 7 student. So I linked my identity when I was a young man as too small to do a lot of the things, which brought on, not knowing at the time, a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about being small, getting knocked off the puck, getting knocked off a ball, getting pushed around a little bit from some of the bigger friends in my circles at the time, and in a playful way. It was never negative, but I knew that I was tinier than others. In grade 7, I was 63 pounds. As a matter of fact, when I first started wrestling, there wasn't even a weight class for me. I was below the lightest weight, so I was already giving up weight, venturing into my first tournaments per se. And so I linked my identity there. When I got into wrestling, I thought that, well, here's this thing I've never seen before. My dad introduced me to it. Actually, there was the World Championships of Wrestling. The highest level of wrestling was taking place in Edmonton, the World Championships in 1982. And my dad thought, hey, let's watch this. This is a pretty unique thing. So when I saw it, I fell in love with it right away. But what I noticed right away was there was these weight classes. So it didn't discriminate against the small person, tall, big in size, whatever. And I thought, man, I would love to try something like that. And so on, next thing you know, I find myself in a school with a wrestling program in the city of Edmonton for the first time. And even though I was a small individual, I was able to kind of go up against people my size. So I felt like I had a bit, not an edge, but it was equal in a sense where I could start to learn something and not feel that my size mattered in any way. Right. So in those early days, I put my identity in thinking I was too small. And I think I had one coach tell me in baseball when I wanted to try to make this team, and he told me I was too small. Right? And I had one girl that I had a crush on called me a shrimp, which led to me going to my dad going, "What's a shrimp mean?" And he started laughing and goes, "That means that you're short, my son." And right there, boom, it was the start of like, huh, I didn't even realize, but now I do. And that brought me to wrestling, man. And so my initial days, I wanted to wrestle so I can hold my own against bigger guys. And then I come to find out that that's not really what it was about at all, about trying to defeat whoever was bigger than you. Right? It was trying to be yourself and be happy with the gifts that you were provided as a human being and utilize them to the best of your ability. And over the years, I learned that.
Well, wrestling in itself is quite a unique sport, right? You mentioned yourself, it's built for all sizes. There's weight categories and that kind of thing. But in reality, you found your way of being identified as a wrestler. But what stood out about it? Was it the belonging to a group? Was it the structure wrestling gave you? Was it a level of control? Or was it that sense of recognition of what you was achieving?
It's a lot of all of that, actually. It's really great question. I think for me in the original days when I was sitting in the stands watching this sport that I didn't really even know existed at the time at age 11 with my dad, and he didn't know, he didn't come from a wrestling background either. And here we are at the University of Alberta at the time. This was in 1982, and I noticed right away the international. I never saw anybody from China before. I never saw anybody from Russia, from all these different countries from around the world. The diversity there was unique. I never heard other languages being spoken in a room before other than English and maybe French, just being in Canada. I didn't have that life experience to see that. I've read about it in books, but to see it up front was very intriguing to me. I remember that early on when I was a young boy. That right away struck me as unique, and it kept me really interested. And then when I started to see the athletes, that two athletes, you can have an athlete from Poland and an athlete from Brazil, two different individuals, right? Two different upbringings, two different languages, can't even communicate verbally and understand one another, but somehow they understood each other doing what they were doing in this mix of Olympic wrestling. And that struck me right away. Immediately, I thought this was amazing. They're speaking a language without actually speaking to each other. And I thought that right away. The physicalities of it, I loved. I was a rambunctious kid. I loved play wrestling. I remember growing up, my dad used to run these little events with my brother and I in the house, sock wrestling. We, wrestle on the ground and try to get the other person's sock off our feet. And it was a party trick for my dad. He'd sit back and drink a beer and watch my brother and I try to rip each other's socks off. So I was always a rambunctious kid. So leaning into that was great. I also love the fact that it was an individual sport. I had struggled making some teams because I was little and sometimes pushed off. And I wanted to get onto these teams in grade 6 and grade 7. And I felt like sometimes I was kind of pushed to the side, almost the quintessential picked last kid on the wall. Right, at times, right, and you never want to. At least I didn't want to have that feeling, and I really felt that in the early days where I was being left out because I might have been a little tinier than your average student at that age. So knowing that it was weight classes and an individual sport, I felt like, man, I can now, if I got out there and learn this, then it's up to me to kind of figure it out, and I don't have a team around me. Although I found out later on in life that wrestling is more of a team sport than it is an individual sport in which to kind of achieve those bigger goals in life that you set within it. So I hope that
As a
answers it.
wrestler, competing against other keen, disciplined wrestlers of all different shapes and sizes, there's a level of expectation put on your shoulders because you want to make the team and want to succeed. But at
Yeah.
what point did you, around that journey, were strength stopped being something you did and started becoming who you were? Was it the currency that you had was strength?
Yeah, strength. That's a funny term because wrestling is such a humble sport. So through all the develop in the long-term athlete development model, that you're trying to grow into that high performance and you're trying to kind of work your way there. In the early days between the ages of like, say 6 to 12, you're getting those fundamentals and you never feel strong. Like, you never feel physically strong. You're trying to achieve this strength. So, and in wrestling is a lot of leverage and this and that. And my coach used to say, it's not how strong you are as a person, it's the right use of the strength you have. So how do you apply the strength that you have? So, and that could be in twofold. It could be in your physical strength. It could also be in your fortitude and in your mental strength. And how do you balance those two together? Where it kind of clicked for me, it wasn't in those younger years. It was about having fun, learning the fundamentals, always feeling humbled. There's nothing more humbling than being held down against your will, at any level. So there it is again. Like, I never ever felt strong. It wasn't that I had this insecurity that I was weak, right? I knew that I had some, athleticism and some levels of strength and capacities, either physical or mental, but you always felt like it wasn't enough. It kept you there. And then the process of the structure of repetitions of the drills and showing up to practice every day and sacrificing all those other things over time built in this process in your life, or at least for me, where it became not only robotic in the discipline, that one day you just kind of open your mind, you're ready, you're prepared for a match, for a practice, and the strength is already there. You just trust it. Right. And then you move on and you hope for the best. And a lot of times hoping that you have a good plan ahead of you to take what strength you have, to take what physical attributes you can bring in, mental attributes that you can bring in to a match and attack that plan.
As a young person going through wrestling, did it often give you an environment or a space to be vulnerable with your colleagues or just in general?
Absolutely. Right from the very beginning, the vulnerability was in the room of a wrestling space. If it is anybody's ever been in a wrestling space before, and it could be similar to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, any of those grappling spaces now, it's a lot more popular than it was when I first started. It wasn't a household term like it is today. Cauliflower ears didn't exist when I was growing up. We had them, and all it did was repel girls, really. That's all it really did. But the vulnerability was there from the very beginning. And I remember the first taste of vulnerability where I had to become vulnerable was actually the uniform for me first. It wasn't the actual wrestling in and of itself, knowing that it's very difficult and physically demanding and takes a long time and a lot of effort to hone in on techniques in which to be successful. It was the uniform, which we refer to as a singlet. And I remember I had a short and t-shirts and a pair of runners when I first started. And then one day my coach says, we're going to have a little meet and you guys got to wear this, here's this, pulls out this little skimpy little outfit, and I go, I'm not wearing that. Immediately not wearing that. Right. And he says, Corey, this is the required uniform. right? You will wear this and you are wearing this and this is what it is, right? You're not wearing your t-shirt, right? You're not wearing your sweatpants. This is the singlet and you're going to get used to it, right? And he would always say, just like you got to get used to 1,000 double leg takedowns in which to be good at it, you're going to have to put this on 1,000 times before you get used to it, right? So show some vulnerability in there. That was where my first taste of it was. And again, going back to where I often say that wrestling is a very humbling sport because it's humbling to be held down against your will. So you're constantly vulnerable because you're in that feeling of trying to gain success and you feel like a minnow in a shark's pond most times. And it doesn't matter if you're the best person in the room or maybe the least amount of experience in the room, right? I don't like to say best and worst. I say more experience, less experience. And you may encounter each other and you can still you feel how wrestling just humbles you in that vulnerability.
Very powerful of putting yourself in that place where the uncertainty and I know you're going to cope with that
Yeah.
expectation in an unfamiliar zone can actually have different challenges for you to overcome. So in an high performance wrestling environment, the demands psychologically, what are they for a young?
Oh gosh, man, it demands so much. I like to say when I work with like university athletes or high performance athletes, it demands a sacrifice that's in the 1 percentile, especially if you want to be. And I would probably put this across the board on any high performance sport. You're playing rugby, playing basketball, you're playing hockey, whatever you choose to do in the realm of high performance, right away, the balance of sacrifice. If I had, we do goal setting sessions at the beginning of each year. We'd often go to it 2 to 3 times a year actually and reevaluate what we've said at the beginning of the year in terms of what we're going to do. Talk about our yearly goals. We talk about our practice goals, our monthly goals, and our macro or basically what do you want to be when you grow up? Like I'm training you now for 5 years from now. you know, in the world of Olympic sport, you're looking at 4 year quadrennials, and on average to make an Olympic Games in wrestling, you're looking at 3 of those. So that's 12 years, right? Of maybe getting a shot at it. So balance and sacrifice right there. So what are you willing to give up? What are the hard things in your life that you're willing to add to your life, eh, that you don't do now in which to claim a high performance goal? What are you willing to give up and sacrifice? You get a phone call on a Tuesday night where it's cheap night at the movies, and I had an athlete tell me they want to be a national champion or a world champion in the next 10 years or 5 years or even that year. And they got to go to the movies on Monday because it's a cheap night and they just met a nice girl or a nice fella. And it's like, is that part of the sacrifice? So like I missed my high school prom because of wrestling. Right. At the time, I regretted it a little bit, but over long periods of time, it wasn't a regret. I felt like I didn't mess out because the integrity that you put towards your goals is like, man, if you say you're going to do this thing and you're going to balance and sacrifice those things in which to achieve those big things you say for yourself, then you have to be willing to hold on to that decision, right? And take the sacrifices around the high performance sport. So that's a long answer to that question.
Well, you talked there a little bit about self-sacrifice and the discipline that you have to compete in wrestling. But as a young person, you're still growing up, you're still maturing in the right way. So there's going to be times where emotionally, you feel soft, you feel vulnerable. How do you handle fear? So what happens then in that elite environment regarding emotion? Are you allowed to express it or is it suppressed?
Absolutely. I think emotion is very, very important. I love emotions. I love anger. I love being happy. I like being sad. I like being anxious. I think in a high performance setting, identifying what your emotions are and making sure you have a plan in which to cope with that emotion when you're up against adversity. So that is a thing you mature into as an athlete, is hitting all these emotions. Like for me, just with be having the fear of feeling weak or soft. Are you able to kind of express softness? Absolutely. And I think it comes through really trusting relationships in the environments that you keep, which helps for that. So for me, it was a lot easier to share all levels of emotions with my teammates, with my coaches that are helping me to develop. That was very helpful. And it was great practice because that also learning how to be vulnerable in those environments of really trusted, like my friends and my teammates and my coaches that who I trust and kind of put everything into, I give them permission to show their emotions to me too and to trust me and I trust them. That gave me good practice to do that outside of the wrestling mat with my own personal relationships. And my wife and I are we try to communicate everything, no unmet conversations, regardless of how it's making you feel. You meet those conversations, right? and you express who you are on the inside and out. And hopefully over time you do it in a very charitable way where you're not, in no way are you soft because you decide you want to, share vulnerability about how you're feeling. If you're winning or losing in wrestling, you gotta talk to somebody. And I think it's the environments that you keep that are very important and who you choose to be a part of those circles. Of course, a young person or any person wanting to involve themselves in a team program, you have some really good individuals there that you can kind of hang your hat on at times and hang your shoulder, put your hat on their shoulder for that. And that was I was very grateful to have a really good group of men and women over the years to help me do that.
Corey, I really appreciate you sharing that. One of the reasons behind this podcast is to reach out to like-minded people who've got lived experiences where they've overcome a challenge or challenges through life and have got that lived experience that they can share that experience. And whoever may be listening to this may resonate from your journey. And I hope they do, because then they may take the advice needed or look at what you did as a way going forward to help with that. Looking back now in your early years through wrestling, were there any moments where you was already quietly breaking, where the weight of expectation was getting too much for you? You noticed, but no one else could see it.
Absolutely. The pressures of being an athlete, they're there. Examples of some of the pressures is, you find some success early and then you want to keep that success. The afraid to succeed syndrome, where you win a couple and then it's like you put all your stock and identity on the next win and the next win and the next win just to keep that status of winning. First time I ever made a national team, I remember the government, and I still believe they do it now. They give carded funding out to athletes, a particular set of athletes that if you make a certain standard in your sport, they give you some government funding, tax free, right? It helps to offset some of the training costs. It's a little bit of a badge of honor. It makes it a little bit lighter on your school because it'll pay for school, and that's a thing a lot of young athletes will chase. A lot of high performance athletes will chase that carding funding. So you make a national team and you get this carding funding. And I remember when that happened to me for the first time, right? Where I was wrestling to try to set my goals to make a national team and represent my country, and that was the most important thing for me was to want to represent Canada. I wanted a leaf on my back. I wanted to see that. I wanted to be that proud Canadian that could go and be a name in the country and represent, And then I get that, and then all of a sudden they hand me some money, right? And it's like, oh man, this is nice. And I'm not talking millionaire money, just enough to kind of get through school and pay the bills and offset some of the training, but it was a bit of status. And then all of a sudden now it's like, man, if I lose this next match, I'm going to lose that funding. And that was a big stress for me. So now it was about just keep winning so I can keep that funding alive so I don't have to have the stresses of any sort of financial problems because I budgeted my life now on this. And now it didn't become about wrestling, it came about carting money or cutting weight, like making the weight. It didn't become about the stresses there too. Having to balance and sacrifice. I had to weight manage. I was 125.5 pounds, 57 kilos, and I was a little bit big for that weight. I was too small for the weight above, but too big for the weight below, caught in the middle. So for about a 10-year period, I had to, bring myself down to that 125 pounds, probably 6 or 8 times a year, flat, depending on the season. And man, it was a weight cutting tournament. If I celebrated more when I made the weight, right? And so those kind of goofy little things to kind of keep that status alive. If I make the weight, I'm going to do well. If I go up a weight, I'm going to lose, and it became a weight cutting competition. So I lost sight of what I was doing in a lot of ways. And when it came to sport, and again, had to go in to find those mentors and learn from some of the best that helped me ground myself in what I was doing. And I remember my coach one time told me, he says, Corey, he says, wrestling is about loving something, right? It's about loving what you're doing more than your opponent. It's not about winning or losing. It's about loving the process of what you're doing. And you know what? When you're in love with something and something's in love with you, some love hurts, man. It's not always. It's like you establish a relationship with the sport, like I would you or I would my wife. And love hurts. It's an unconditional love that you have to give back to it, even when it kicks you back in the face, right? And you got to choose to love it still and find the love of what you're doing. And then you don't have to worry about the carding money, the winning, the losing, the status, the national team, the maple leaf. Dude, if you put enough love and passion into that and unconditionally go through that process of loving what you're doing, all that stress goes away. It did for me. And I wish I would have learned that earlier as an athlete. I kind of, I stressed myself out a lot in those early days. It was the last couple years of my career where I really felt I was feeling no stress there.
You mentioned there about the shift really from the competitive Corey to the weight of expectation, Corey, especially with
Yeah.
the link to the financial support. What were the signs then where you noticed that stress on you? Was it manifesting itself physically, or was it more of a mental thing that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I think it was, I wouldn't say it was a physical threat to me. I felt like I was always, physically ready to go at any time when as an athlete. It was more the mental where I started to kind of link my identity to being on a national team, being a wrestler, and having that funding status. I think at that time when I was on the team, they funded out of all wrestlers in Canada, right across, I believe there was about 10 weight classes when I wrestled. I think there might be 12 now. It's gone down to 8. They change it over the years. But when I was wrestling, there might have been about 10 weight classes. And out of those 10 weight classes, you might get, I think, about 12 to 15 carded athletes in all of Canada in the sport of wrestling for men. And I think they gave out about 2 or 3 developmental cards for some of the junior athletes that were coming up, a little bit half of the funding. So to be a part of that was a rare group. And wrestling didn't have as much funding as some of the other sports too. So you're kind of grasping at what you could get because of course the federal government would also have their budgets and so on and so forth. So when I got to that, it was this identity of I have to keep that. It's not as important as winning, right? As learning how to be a virtuous and solid and good wrestler. It was about keeping that status. So for me, it was like status. It was like I saw the carded athlete list for the first time and my name was on it. There was something about that I felt that it just made me feel more important, right? So whatever insecurity that I was holding on to at that time, probably didn't understand it then. It was an insecurity of I don't have to be a good at the sport. I just have to maintain this status. When the irony is you don't get that status unless you're focused on being a good athlete and learning how to balance how to be a high performance athlete and a wrestler. That comes first. And yeah, so it was this real tug and pull of identity.
Canada wrestling, or
Yeah,
the environment of wrestling within Canada, was pretty cutthroat then, really trying to get onto the Olympic training team. One, because of getting a place, but also with the support from the financial implications from the government. So in competitive environments, men are often rewarded for toughness. How did that shape you in a way that processed your fear, failure, or doubt?
exactly. It is a cutthroat environment. I think most cutthroat might be a harsh term. Like nobody's stepping on each other's throats in which to get ahead. In all my years of wrestling, it's you find your ups and downs, and you have the people that you want to go after. But really, it's a small environment where people take care of each other. I love wrestling, where I can go anywhere in the world and be welcomed into a wrestling, right? And that's a beautiful community in that sense. Cutthroat to get ahead wasn't really how I would put it. It was intense. It was a very intense environment to do that.
So in competitive environments, men are often
Right,
rewarded for toughness. How
right.
did that shape you, how you process fear, failure, or doubt?
That's a great question. Where I process toughness, I used to think that toughness was being gruff and headbutty and grindy in the physical way. And that brought myself off the mat too, where I was a gruff and intense and loud person, right? And I thought that was the epitome of toughness. That was the definition of it, you know? You're feeling like you can't go another 1 minute wrestling go on the mat and you do it anyway. And that to me that's tough. Or you're pulling down to that one extra pound and you stay in the sauna and you lose that weight an extra 15 minutes and so that's toughness. Or it comes to find out that that's not what toughness is at all. It's this kind of phony. Oh, you get another tattoo, right? And that's I'm tough. Like that shows this level of toughness. And really it's just you're showing your insecurities in plain sight is what you're doing. And to me the toughest people in the sport of wrestling, and if you can define tough, I can define tough in stoic principles. The toughest ones I knew were the quietest. They took their art form and they applied it within the rules with intensity, with purpose, with forcefulness, and they did it. And then they came off the mat as quiet as they walked on. They had nothing else to prove. And that was it. And I think that's where I lacked that as a young athlete in a lot of ways. I felt that my toughness was being loud, being abrasive, going that extra mile. Not that that's bad on training, but I'm doing it for the wrong purposes. And yeah, that's the young Corey back in the day. And every now and then he pops out, and I try to get a handle on that.
Wrestling, like most combat sports, really, it helps you to be tough in the sport itself. And we talked earlier on about vulnerability and the use of emotion. Were you you ever taught to talk about emotion as a person, as a wrestler? Did you ever felt that you were safe to do that, or was you told to suppress it as a way of overcoming the challenges?
Yeah, excellent question. I think those spaces and avenues now today are improving, but in my day, there was no space. It was survival of the fittest. If you had a sore elbow, your coach would tell you to use your other elbow. If you had something going on at home, you were still expected to make that practice like anybody else, and you weren't going to tell what was going on at home. You were just going to deal with it. So you kind of found yourself in a vessel. You're just kind of moving in this vessel. There's tons of peripheral distractions, some good, some bad, that can take you out of that aim of what your goal is as an athlete. And it's very scary that I was able to sift through. Like, it's crazy that I was able to sift through a lot of times because I had no avenue to talk to. I think my drinking, wrestling was a work hard, play hard sport. I think rugby and wrestling have a lot in common. It's a work hard, play hard sport. Hockey, I've seen some of my hockey player friends work hard, play hard, right? Do all you can as an athlete, sacrifice all the things for the physical and the technical and the high goal sets to get on teams and to make particular results at the high level. And then on your off time, unleash with drinking and partying and when you have that time. And then it's just kind of yo-yo balance. And then in that, a lot of brokenness is taking place. Not only in that, you'd get away from some of the brokenness that you want to discuss, but had no avenue in which to do it. And then it was status quo for kind of a lot of the guys. So you were just in it together, right? So you never talked about it, right? So if I had something going on at home, I wasn't talking about it. If I had something going on at work, I wasn't talking about it, right? If I had something, problem with any of my teammates or well, maybe my teammates, they'd hear about it, but my coach, I wouldn't, there was no questioning it. That was it. And then with my drinking, yeah, I think over time enabled me to kind of hold it all in until rock bottom hits. And then all of a sudden, everybody's going to see your problem, right? Except for you, right? And then now you have to talk about it because somebody else addressed it, and then you're wondering what, and then now it's a soul search on how to get healthy from there and be really vulnerable.
I really appreciate you sharing that, Corey. And it takes us on to alcohol itself. You mentioned it quite openly in conversation and at the beginning of this podcast about your struggle with alcohol earlier on. Alcohol is often used as a coping strategy. And even in my journey with PTSD, I used alcohol to help me sleep or to block out the horrific images I deal with every day. And even to this day, I still see them thoughts, but I try and use other mechanisms to help, one of them being CrossFit. So what was alcohol helping you to avoid?
Alcohol was helping me to avoid responsibility. I put my identity in that because I felt my personality needed to be a certain way, right? I was never an angry drunk. I was kind of fun guy, right? I would have been fun guy. And I remember the doctors and some of my counselors when I was going through counseling with that, they kind of labeled me as a functional alcoholic, which in turn I thought that was a bit of an oxymoron because I was not functioning well, right? But yeah, you hear this term functioning alcoholic. So as a coach, I never missed a practice, never missed a tournament, always on time, got everything going, had tons of energy, did all the things. No one ever questioned my work ethic, but yet I'm drinking 20 to 25 beers a day. And if I'm traveling, excuse to drink even more, right? When I'm away, right? From in hotels, in airports, in establishments that were regular to me, right? Based on travel and even in my home. And it just kept snowballing into this point. And yeah, man, it got crazy to a point which I like to call the fog. Like I was in this fog being functional, right? So the world around me had given me responsibilities, and I'd always say I was a person of integrity. Like I want to be a person of integrity. This is one thing I really want. Like if I die tomorrow, I don't care if they tell me I won X amount of national wrestling championships, or I owned the most successful CrossFit gym in the world, or I had the most successful marriage, I don't want to be known like that. Corey was a person of integrity. That's all I know about the guy. What he says is what he did, and he was a good man in the process of integrity. So here I am doing all these things as a coach, which was my job, doing things in Motivate Canada with talking to kids and going to schools and doing these things and getting accolades for that. But then yet I'm supposed to be a person of integrity. I have this hidden kind of like life on the side that nobody was either knew about because they just didn't know, or if they did know, they weren't telling me. And here I am living a double life. And it wasn't until my wife pointed it out, honey, you weren't. I remember she says, these aren't the promises that you gave to me when we were married. right? And at this point, we're married 29 years this September. I've been sober now for this will be 13, it'll be 14 years this July. So I was already like into our marriage quite a bit there, and the intimacy was just destroyed over so much time that I couldn't even share some of my accolades with of wrestling with my wife and as a coach, because she was just in another, like, I put her in another world, and this phony world. Here I am wanting to show my colleagues, my athletes, all these people that are really kind of strangers to me, not them really the most important people in your life, that I'm this man of integrity, but it was a lie. Right. And so I had to dial it back. And, when my wife pointed out that those weren't the promises. And if I'm going to, be a man of honor, I have to look at those promises again. And in turn, I have to look back in within myself and look in the mirror and identify something that I couldn't identify. Somebody else told me. And then I could have either gaslit that person, which I probably did for a lot of years. I had to look at it and agree to it. And yeah, it was a domino effect and a ripple effect of just complete intimacy destroying not only my marriage, but all my relationships in a silent way. All my athletes got about 60% of Corey for about 10 years. But they would come and say, Coach, you don't have to apologize. We loved what you do. You're a good man, right? No, you could have got a lot more Corey if I was healthy and honest. I was hiding this on the side. And so I had to come to grips with that. And then once I did, with a lot of help and a lot of support from various people. I was able to get my way through that fog and start to see myself, and my faith grew, where I started to plant my identity not on things, not on stuff. Any advice I give to somebody who's dealing with addiction is don't land your identity on the things you do. Bring your purpose to the things you do, and your purpose is, to me, divinely guided. It's been offered to you. I'm a man of faith, and whoever's watching your channel, I'm not sure who is, but it might touch somebody who can resonate with faith and relationship. And my relationship was with God. And once I stacked my identity onto his, because I read it said I'm created in his image and likeness. So I need to put my identity on a person. And that made way for me to really kind of find what my purpose was as a human being, where I can link in and tap into some of my God-given gifts in which to give them back to a James, to a CrossFit, to an athlete. I'm giving back what's already been given, and then stacking my identity on a person, which is Jesus. And that helped me a lot. AA helped me to see that in the early days when I went to AA, and then addictions counseling downtown. I did that for a little while, and then eventually found my way into circles of people like yourself with PTSD, alcohol addictions, drug addictions. Found my way around these people, and then I always love talking to them. I want to hear their story. To me, it was the story, the personal connection, and the story of another human being that really intrigued me, and it helped me to heal because I felt I wasn't alone.
Corey, that's incredibly powerful. And first of all, congratulations on where you are in your own journey and being sober. 13 years this year, and I'm sure you'll keep on driving forward. Alcohol for me was a coping mechanism. It was a way of masking the symptoms that I had to deal with and try and use it as a numbing kind of sensation where I didn't, as you mentioned before, not being accountable, not dealing with the reality that I was living in.
Right.
So if anybody was listening to this podcast, what would be the key message that you would have for anybody who uses addiction to cope? What would you ask them to do?
I would hope that if anybody was listening to this that's struggling with any form of addiction is already at the point where they've identified that they have one. Like I was in the blind spot for a while. It was a blind spot for me for a long time. I didn't know. Here I am drinking, and it was just a part of my life. It was weaved into the things that I do. And because crucial conversations are hard, a lot of people, I don't blame them. They didn't tell me, or they didn't see any signs. And if they did, they weren't going to come to me. And it was until the closest people to me started to identify it to me, and which helped me kind of see. So the first piece of advice, and hopefully it's not advice, if anybody's listening and you're questioning whether or not you do have a problem or not, try to find that first. Try to see it, right? And some of the signs would be in which to see it is like, what are the things in your life that you believe are good, but you know deep down are unraveling? What are you hiding? Like I used to hide beer cans in the trees when I used to live in Hubbard's. I used to hide receipts. I used to hide all the time, thinking I was doing the right thing. I just thought this is what you do. The blind spot was me. I was unknowingly hiding things. And then when I started to identify the things that I thought were going good in my life, but were actually unraveling, I started to see it differently. So it's like I had to identify the problem, right? Once I did, now I can start moving forward to not, maybe I can use the word with a lack of better terms, fix the problem or deal with the problem and find the structured points on what to do to deal with it. So if somebody's dealing with an identified problem right now and they're listening, let's go 1 minute at a time. Find small wins. If today's the day, right? I've identified that I have a problem with addiction. Find some wins in there. We all like to win. My first win was get up in the morning at the same time. No more sleeping in, no more this and that. Get up at the same time and clean your room. If that could be the only thing that you do that day that's right, that's a start. Find somebody right away that you know. One of my things, I had a friend of mine who called me 2 years ago at 2 in the morning. I hadn't talked to him in 15 years. He's a former athlete, a teammate of mine. I hadn't talked to him in probably 15 years. I get a Facebook message call from him, and it's a weird ring. I don't know if you've ever had a Facebook ring happen before. Did you ever hear that ring? It's a weirder ring. And typically I don't answer the phone at 2 in the morning, but it was near my bedside, but it was a weird ring. My wife thought there was an alarm on my phone that was going off and kind of like, hey, honey, I think your alarm is on. You might want to turn it off. And I kind of peeked over and I see my friend's name. I won't mention it, but I see my friend's name on it. And I'm like, my gosh, that's weird. That must be a pocket dial. I'll catch him in the morning. But for whatever reason, I answered it anyway at 2 in the morning. And I got to coach CrossFit at 6 a.m. So I wasn't getting up for a couple more hours. And I answered it. And the first thing he said to me wasn't hello, hey, it's been a long time. It wasn't beating around the bush. It was the pure identified problem that came right at me right at that. He goes, hey, Corey, hey, man, how'd you quit drinking? He literally asked me a question. It wasn't a hello. It wasn't a good morning. Hey, long time no talk. Hey, Corey, how'd you quit drinking? And then I go, hello? Right? And then we started to talk and share. And I just wanted to hear him where he was at that moment, meeting him where he was at, and talk to him all the way in the drive to the gym, and started my class at 6. And then every day after that, for him, I knew he was new. Right? He was new, but I knew that I was once there. I remember it. The identified problem, an identified situation that I have no control over. I need to help cope with it and deal with it. He called me, it was a friend. I had some friends to do that in my day. And I told him, I said, listen, I want you to call me tomorrow. I want you to just send me a text message. It can be a call or a text message. And I want you to do it at your time. Okay. This is a 3-hour time zone. Okay. Your time at exactly 6:59. So he says, okay, so 7 o'clock. And I go, no, 6:59. So applying structure. That would be a piece of advice right away. A planned structure in your life that differs from the unraveling of your problems with what you're in your problems. We're unstructured when we're addicted to something, man. We're going here, we're going there, we're going to get it when we can. We're going to change our plans in which to get to the next drink, to the next, you know, we're going to do it. Right. So I said 6:59, and he said, that's weird, man. I said, no, man, structure at 6:59. Text hello, good morning, or you can call me if you want. So for 3 straight months, 6:59, if I could show you the string. Hey, Corey, I'm up. Hey, Corey, I'm up. And then that led to phone calls, that led to talk, and that led to him now. He's almost this is about almost 3 years ago, 3 years sober, right? And I was able to meet him in Edmonton there a couple times, and we're talking about structures and what we can put in our life. What can we replace, our unraveling? We have a whole bunch of stuff. What are you doing when you are unraveling? Identify all those problems. Oh, I go to the bar at 2 o'clock. Oh, I take a drink at 7 and it leads to seven drinks, right? And I'm doing this haphazardly. Those are problems. Identify them all. Replace them with something else. Put structure in it. For you, it's CrossFit. But a lot of times it's fitness. Find something hard and structured. I love CrossFit for that. It gives you something written on a board and some other human being leads you through it. There's not a lot of thinking going on. You don't have to even program your own program. Someone's programming you. And then when you get really good at being led through structure, you learn to structure yourself and become more confident in the structuring of yourself. You see a lot of people do well in the fitness aspect of it. Just imagine if you applied structure to your personal life and everything you do. It's amazing. Where there's good structure is good discipline. You have good structures in your life, you build discipline. Discipline becomes structure. Now, I'm not waiting for a feeling of motivation. That's bollocks. That's just not right to me. I don't want any feeling. I want structure and I want discipline, and I want to make sure my structures are formulated, measured, so I can control them, right? And I can predict them, predict my next move. You know what I mean? think before I act.
Corey, that's incredible, mate. Thank you for sharing that. And if this conversation resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in any part of it, make sure you subscribe to Trauma, Training and Transformation on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your podcasts. These conversations about honest strength. Share this episode with someone you believe might need to hear it. Corey, as we move on, I'd like to just touch on your work with wrestling, CrossFit, and you lived inside an intense training culture. What does discipline in physical training give men psychologically that conversation alone cannot?
Yeah. Well, what discipline can give men in particular, I think men thrive on structure, I think. They seek discipline. We're trying to seek this discipline. A lot of times, I think for me, it started like seeking motivation. I touched on it just briefly about how everybody wants to be motivated in which to be disciplined, right? So I see it in the CrossFit gym all the time. I get a new person coming in that may not have done fitness before in their lives. They've never picked up a barbell, a dumbbell. It might be really new to them. So I get that extreme to maybe somebody who's 35 or 40 who was once really active at one time and then life got a hold of them. They just started their family and they got little kids and they got a job, new responsibilities, and then all of a sudden they find themselves inactive and an epiphany reaches them, and then they find themselves in front of Corey at the CrossFit gym, having a little consultation on what's next for them in their life of health. And I like to have those conversations with people because you meet them where they're at, and then you tease them into uh, uh, letting them know it's a one day at a time situation here. Where how do you get disciplined through reps? Okay? One rep at a time becomes consistency, and then consistency becomes habit. And then habit and consistency coupled together with a really hard activity like CrossFit, you get good at it, and then it becomes a discipline. And a discipline is for life. So I'm not a big advocate of like, come and try my 8-week program and you're going to get abs and you're going to get strong and you're going to get fit. And after 8 or 12 weeks, you're going to lose 20 pounds. It's like, no, there is no 8 to 12 weeks. This is a lifetime commitment towards being structured and disciplined in which for you to be healthy. So where are your values? Are your values on an 8-week lose weight quick plan? Is that what you value? I think you value something completely different other than the fitness and the health. You value probably looking good, or you probably wanting to measure up with better abs because you feel like you got a dad bod, right? I think your identity's tagged on something else. I go, but if you really value being healthy and disciplined and structured and having fitness and health as a part of your life where you don't even think about it. I get up in the morning and brush my teeth. I don't think about it. It just happens. I shower. I don't think about it. I'm just in the shower because I value being clean and I value having good teeth. Nobody has to tell me, right? And I value going to the gym. If I travel, the first thing I pack are my workout gear. I know that's a part of my structured, disciplined life. And so that's what I try to help people kind of get to from day one, is just to understand that this is not easy. It's a structure. It's a rep by rep consistency that eventually will lead to discipline, which will eventually lead to a lifetime commitment to something that becomes natural, like breathing, right?
Very much
Part of you.
so. And I think the use of movement in those two disciplines can help you create a structure, a discipline of what you want to do in life. But it
Yeah.
also helps you to overcome, if you're suffering with any form of anxiety, you need to build confidence and self respect. Do you see that often in the CrossFit and wrestling environment?
Yeah, both wrestling and CrossFit. We're talking about CrossFit. I can talk about anxieties coming in. It's beautiful to watch. Love in our gym. And you've been there, James, at CrossFit Basing View. It's a pretty diverse group. We probably have a from ranging from ages 6 all the way up to age 69, 70 years old. And our median age there is middle age. I'd say we're looking at about between 35 and 45 is where we're at. None of us are training to make the CrossFit Games or the Olympic Games. We're all there just trying to be a little bit better than we were yesterday, and we're using the community environment to kind of hold each other accountable, one day at a time, helping people make a goal, set a goal, and then even change a goal to make it better and bigger for them in their lives, and see things that they might not have seen for themselves, that they could reach in a capacity. And it's a really neat thing to see it. It starts there in that CrossFit gym from day one. It happens in wrestling too, where you have this kind of community group around you that helps you to your goal, right? I said earlier that wrestling is an individual sport, and that I thought that's what kind of gravitated me to it. Was I like the fact that it's an individual. It's just me and the other person. I don't have to have a team. So if I disappoint anybody, it's going to be me. It's not going to be somebody else, right? On the team if I miss a puck or a ball. But really, it's the environment, the community environment that really helped me, gave me permission to be a bit vulnerable. And it was them that helped carry me to my individual goals. Interesting, right? We all set these individual goals. You set them in CrossFit. People come into my gym all the time and say, hey, Corey, my individual goal is to do this and this and this. And then yet, ironically enough, it's a group of people that help reach that individual goal. So you're not alone, right? And then all the baggage we might carry in, you get these timid people that have never stepped foot in the gym before in their lives. They hear banging of weights all over the place. And I like to say, give yourself permission. I like to use that term. Give yourself permission to deal with that because it's okay. All right. You're feeling a little timid right now? Give yourself permission to be okay with it. I like to say that because if you give yourself permission, you hope it's a yes, move forward. It's going to be hard today, but not as hard tomorrow. You don't have to do 500 workouts in a row, 500 days in a row. You do one day in a row and then mark it back to zero and do another one in a row. And then mark it back to zero and then do one in a row. And then mark it back to zero and then do one in a row. Sooner or later, you're going to look up and do maybe you did 300 in a row. But really, it's one at a time, one in a row.
And those interactions are unique because you get to know your athletes and they get to learn about you, and you can create a bond in the CrossFit environment. You now
Yeah.
move on to working with Motivate Canada. And this is
Yeah.
where you help young people and athletes craft their own personal stories. So why is learning to own yourself, your own story, so powerful then when young men are so facing adversity?
Man, I like to share with not only young people that we were designed very valuably unique. So my story, your story, the way we've weaved through life is so different. And to kind of always keep a curious mind about the other, the heart of the other, it's amazing what you can find out. Not that you're mining for gossip and information. Dude, I want to know the heart of the person. I can't live your life real time, but I'll tell you, you're away for 6 months and come back and tell me stories about your last 6 months. It's intriguing. You learn things. And so stories are so important. I think not only they're important to know your own story and to be articulate enough to be able to share it in certain venues, depending on what type of venue you're in or what type of space you're in. You might have to share snippets of your story for whatever reason. Not only is that valuable and amazing, it's so good to be able to know that your story can you don't know who needs to hear it. You might think it's boring or irrelevant, or you've experienced something in your life that you don't need to. It's so atrocious that you don't want to hear it yourself, but it's yours. But you just don't know who might need to hear it. You don't know. You can't call it. So if you can take your stories, and the way Motivate Canada kind of worked, it morphed. It started here about 30 years ago. There's 4 other athletes that got together. There was a buddy of mine named Ian Bird. He was an Olympian in field hockey. He's out in Australia now. And then there was a really good, I would consider a mentor who was an Olympic wrestler. He was a number of years, 4 or 5 years older than me. His name's Chris Wilson. He's out in Vancouver. He still works in the realm of sport charity. And he started this program called the Esteem Team. So Ian and him, there was another girl named Lisa Ling who was a karate. She was a world champion karate. And 30 years ago, and they birthed this idea on a napkin at an airport about how can we reach young people. And it all stemmed from I remember when Chris called me up and he says, hey Corey, he says, does anybody ever, you're on the national wrestling team, do you have any school teacher friends that ask you to come to their show and tell and with your Canada jacket and talk to the kids? And I go, man, I get that sometimes. And he goes, well, we're starting this thing called the Esteem Team, where we're going to try to get athletes into school settings and in classrooms and full assemblies. And we're going to try to structure it in a way where we can tell stories through the vessel of our sports, right? On how we push through adversity, how we dealt with problems, how we set goals, which is kind of the staple, and get into the hearts of the young people to show them that they can do it and they can push through things and they can set big, bold goals. And not only that, Core, we're going to make sure that we provide them a plan and a structure and how to do that and leave them with something, not only just a positive message, but something that they can tangibly take with them and fix into their own lives. And he structured it, and it started in Vancouver. Eventually, it moved over to Alberta into the western side of Canada. And then in 2003, when I moved here, I was steeped in wrestling out there, and then I moved here because my wife's from here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where I'm from now, or where I live now. I'm originally from Alberta. Oh, three, we moved here, and Chris called me up and said, and I had been doing some esteem team work as an athlete out west, and he says, Corey, we're going national. Our little nonprofit funded by the Sport Canada is going national, and we need a Eastern Canadian rep out there. And this would have been in 2003. So what ended up happening from there in '03, I probably from '03 to about '07, I talked in almost every school in Atlantic Canada. And in the process, also recruited some athletes in, some athletes from other sports. From in this region, canoe kayak, I met Karen Furno was on the esteem team. Jillian D'Alessio was another one. Steve Giles was a big part of the early days of the esteem team in the early 2000s. A lot of athletes in this region. And if you're an athlete, I'd find you and we'd try to get her going. Eh? Paul Tingley, who's a sailor, like he's a para Olympian, really well decorated maritimer in Olympic sports, is an awesome guy. He took our training sessions for public speaking, and I became a trainer in that, speaker and trainer, and it just kind of morphed into it. And then I learned the structures of it, got fairly good at it, and then started to just teach it on to other athletes and bring them in. And it was all about, hey guys, let's share our story so that it may inspire others to know who they are, so they can share their story, their lived out story themselves, right? And that's where it all kind of began in this nonprofit. And then eventually Esteem Team moved itself to Motivate Canada. Motivate Canada was branded into that. And we had all sorts of programs from Aboriginal leadership, where we had a Gen 7 program called Gen 7, Via Youth Pro program where we brought younger people in and did full summits where we did these leadership summits every year and brought 50 young leaders 18 to 25 into a setting and talked about relationship building and goal setting and how they can communicate in their various fields of goals. These are young people that wanted to not just set small goals. They wanted to build buildings in their community so kids can come in and have recreation. They wanted to build change within their community in big ways. And we all got together every year and networked ways to do it. And our association did our very best to help support them in their journeys and stay with them in relationship. So that's kind of
That's a
where,
gr- that's a
yeah.
great organization. Motivate Canada, and the work that you do with the young athletes is not just groundbreaking, but it's also going to help establish good behaviors for those athletes going forward so they can get to where they want to be. So we look at strength as a term. So strength in silence, is it dominance or is it medals? What is it to you? What is strength?
To me, it's not about dominance in medals. It may have been like that at one time, or I may have thought like that at one time. I think strength to me is being able to identify and handle your emotions, to know what they are, when you need to apply them. So if you're dealing with any sort of mental health problem, say you're feeling some anxiety, it's a strong thing to do to be able to identify the feeling that you're at right at that moment in which to cope with it, sit with it, and know that that's not who you are. And that's a practice. So I think to me, strength would be to be a real good steward of your emotions.
Corey, if you have the opportunity to sit down to the man right now who feels that they're quietly breaking but doesn't know how to ask for help, what would you say to him?
Man, if there's anybody here, God willing, there's somebody that listens to this one day, this little podcast that's growing. That James, thank you so much for putting it together. If there's anyone listening and you don't know what to do, text me at 6:59. Text me at 6:59. Have a conversation with somebody. It's first going to start with yourself. Sit down at the end of your bed and acknowledge exactly where you are. And you're okay because you're good. You're okay. Even if it's for 2 seconds, you know you're okay for 2 seconds. You're sitting at the end of your bed and you're okay. And tell somebody else that you're okay, even if you're not okay. Call them, text them randomly. You never know what reply you're going to get. You just can't call it. You can't call your next 2 seconds. So sit in it where you are right now, acknowledge it, and know that you are not your pain. You are not your problem. Your identity is not in what you do, not in how you feel. It's not in your struggle. You don't find your identity in your struggle. And if you're a faith person, you find your identity in a person that's bigger than you, that has designed us to be good and has designed us to be with him and has designed us to take and bring our purpose to the world. Best part of it is to find what your purpose is, and that is to do as many things as possible to see where the fruits lie. If things are good in what you're doing and it's bearing fruit in some capacity, you're on the right track, man. That's
Corey,
something that I would offer.
Corey, thank you very much. That's incredible. It's been great having you on today, sharing your message, but more importantly, your journey. And I hope you all the very best with Motivate Canada.
Yeah.
If this conversation reminds us that strength isn't the absence of struggle, it's the willingness to face it honestly. If this episode resonates with you, please like, share, subscribe to Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or wherever you get your podcast from. You can also watch the video on YouTube on my YouTube channel, James Alder 003. You can also join my weekly newsletter on Substack, where I create helpful tips to use movement in a positive way to help with movement, mind, and any mental health issue that you may be going through. And that is on Transformation Through Training. But if you want to continue supporting me with my podcast, Buy Me a Coffee, all the links are in the description box below. If you know a man or woman who might be quietly breaking, share this with them. This is Trauma, Training and Transformation. I'm Dr. James Alder. And remember, movement heals the mind.